in hopefully the least judgmental way possible, because I don't want this to come off judgmentally. But if I ended up in a family that climbed mountains for fun, I would go into witness protection. I've just turned myself down in Audacity because the problem that we have is whenever I do like a sound check, it creeps back up. Yeah. And then when I speak to you and you annoy me, I get really indignant and loud.
If you're between 18 and 12, and obviously it's negative, so minus 18, minus 12, you'll be fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just about there. It's just if you say something annoying, it spikes. So I need to turn it down.
Just my words.
Uh-huh.
So I wanted to talk today about the 3 types of fun. So type 1 fun and type 2 fun, right?
Sorry, hang on. Wait. There are types, there are categorized types of fun.
Of course there are. Categorizing fun.
Is this like your scale, or is it like a scientific thing?
No, this is an actual thing. If you were to Google type 1, type 2 fun. 3 types of fun. I want to talk to you about that today. That's okay.
I'm going to Google it. I'm going to Google it right now.
So
I don't believe you.
Type 1 fun is what you expect. It's an activity that whilst you are doing the activity, you are enjoying yourself. That's type 1 fun, right? And type 2 fun, it might be challenging. It might not be fun whilst you are doing it, but after the fact, you feel that you enjoyed the process. You know, it's not, I don't enjoy doing this, it's I enjoy having done this. Type 1 and type 2 fun, that's what I want to talk to you about today.
I've just Googled this because I was skeptical and it's a real thing. Type 1 fun is enjoyable while it's happening. Type 2 fun is miserable while it's happening, but fun in retrospect. Type 3 fun is not fun at all. It's like a Lemony Snicket book. It's ridiculous.
Oh my God, these Shakespeare references every episode.
Lemony Snicket's a children's author. Don't even start. Not today.
My hobby is mountain climbing. I've gotten big into this year. I'm really having a lot of fun with it. But the truth is, 2/3 of the way up a mountain, if you ask me if I'm enjoying it, I couldn't in all honesty say that it's good. But I keep doing it. So there's something there.
How do you feel about running? Is running type 2? I'm just asking because you ran like a marathon or something that one time. And I personally would put running in type 3.
I've never actually ran a marathon. I've never ran a marathon, as in 26.2 miles. I've only ever ran a variation on a marathon. So, for example, I've run an ultra marathon, and I've done a 40-mile race, but I've never done in one go 26.2 miles. I did once do a relay marathon, which is the worst thing I've ever experienced in my life, which was to run 2.6 miles 10 times. That was the worst one of them all. But yeah, I've never actually ran a normal marathon. I've just...
You test me every day. Literally every. That's not like an overstatement or anything. Like every time I speak to you, you say something obnoxious.
This is the thing that we should talk about, like being prepared for mountaineering, be it something small like climbing Helvellyn, or be it something bigger, because I think there's a lot of interesting aspects to preparation. On one hand, it's just like risk-based decisions, but on the other, I think modern people almost have like an aversion to the idea of being prepared, and I find that hilarious.
Sorry, modern people? Modern humans.
The recent humans.
Recent humans. That's what you're going with.
Well, no, I went with modern people, but you made me change it.
Modern people as opposed to like retro people, like you.
No, your ancestors.
Yeah. Well, how do you know that it's just modern people then? Why would you use that qualifier?
I didn't say that it was just modern people. This could be all people for all time. I don't know. I haven't asked them all.
So, modern people have an aversion to preparedness, which means that we don't climb mountains like robots.
Robots don't climb mountains. Well, do we have mountain climbing robots?
You know what would be a really good use for mountain climbing robots?
MRT.
Last time we had a discussion about mountains, you told me that if you go off track up Everest and you die,
oh, geez,
they don't retrieve your body. And I just feel like mountain climbing robots would solve that problem, you know, because otherwise people could be climbing Everest, committing murder, leaving bodies all over the place.
Problem with that is robots don't handle cold very well, or more specifically, batteries don't handle cold very well. So you would need a robot that is capable of climbing the mountain. It's a very technically difficult climb. It's not the worst, don't get me wrong, but you would need a robot that is capable of doing that ascent. And you would need its battery to be capable of dealing with the cold. And one more thing though, do you know what the death rate as a percentage on Everest is? And do you know what the death rate as a percentage on Kanchenjunga or K2 is?
I do not.
The death rate on Everest is 1 in 8. The death rate on Kanchenjunga is 1 in 3.
That's horrendous.
Yeah.
Why do you like climbing mountains? Like, can you not just like do home workouts or something?
I like climbing mountains because it's type 2 fun. And what I mean by that is the fact that it is physically challenging, and in some instances you don't think you can do it, and the ability to overcome that adversity or the ability to overcome that challenge I find strongly enjoyable.
You could have just said, because it's hard.
It's not because it's hard, though. It's because it is hard but achievable. It's a challenge. It's not the fact that it's difficult. If I wanted something that was difficult, I would try and jump to the moon. Never going to do it. It has to be... Sorry, your face is amazing. You try and jump to the moon. You're not going to do it, are you? It's very hard.
I'm sorry, were you dropped as a child? You can cut this whole section out of the episode and we can start again. But were you dropped as a child?
So can you give me an example of what you think might be like type 1 fun and type 2 fun? Like what kinds of things would you put into those categories?
Okay. Fun while you're doing it. Is there like a reverse though? Where it's like fun at the time but not fun afterwards?
Yeah, I think drinking is a really good example of that, where you're having fun at the time and then afterwards you're regretting some decisions.
Yeah. Maybe that's like type -1.
You wake up in a canal with a hangover.
I've never woken up in a canal with a hangover.
So what's your example of type 1 fun then?
I don't know, like playing Crash Bandicoot.
Yeah, I think most activities that we do day to day, like watching a movie, for example, you're enjoying it whilst you're watching it, you know?
No, I don't put films in type 1 fun. I put them in like type 2, maybe, if they're a good film. Type 3 otherwise.
I think actually that is a fair point, because I tried to reach for like an activity that you would do regularly that you would enjoy. So for example, reading. I've been reading some books recently and I've been enjoying them. But actually the one that I'm reading right now is the subject matter is really dark. So I am enjoying it, but it's one of those books where I know, like, you close the book, you put it down, you're like, my God, that was depressing. It's called Into the Wild, and it's a book about, this isn't a spoiler, it's in the first chapter, a book about a chap who goes into the Alaskan backcountry and he dies out there. And the story of how he dies is the story of the book, and it's really pretty horrendous, but it's one of those, like, I am reading it and I am enjoying it, but I guess, yeah, maybe that's an example of a type 2 book.
The more we talk about this, the more I'm thinking that maybe the scale is too simplistic.
I definitely think the scale is simplistic. There is some activities where you enjoy them somewhat whilst you're doing them and a lot afterwards, and maybe vice versa.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to say like a trampoline park is type 1. Something like that. Endorphins.
You always have fun at a trampoline park.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yep, good. Type 1 fun, trampoline park.
Good.
Just being in a trampoline park. Queuing to get into a trampoline park, you're already having fun.
Well, that's exciting. Yeah, it's fun. And they give you those grippy socks. And climbing mountains. Climbing mountains is what, like a type 2 for you?
Climbing mountains is type 2 fun. And I think one of the things with climbing mountains is it depends which mountain and it depends which time of year. Like, if you're having a summer walkout with the family, you know, you're climbing Snowdon or something like that in the middle of June, that's probably type 1 fun. You know, you're with friends or family, you're having a good time, the weather's good, those kinds of things. But if you are climbing in the depths of winter, you know, I sent you recently, didn't I, a photograph of Ben Nevis just a couple of weeks ago with some serious snow on the top. And I think most people in those situations might think, yeah, actually, that is maybe not so fun because it's challenging.
Some people really like climbing mountains and they try and like force their friends to climb mountains too.
We have to check the recording, but I'm pretty sure you said climbing mountains.
I probably did. You can cut it out.
Sound like Benedict Cumberbatch trying to say the word penguin.
Penglings. These penglings.
So I do like climbing mountains. I like the activity of climbing mountains. I like preparing for climbing mountains. And I like the fact that when you go out there, if you're doing something serious, you don't necessarily know what your experience is going to be during that, right? Some days you're going to go up and it's going to be a summer's day walk and it's going to be great. And other days you're going to go up and it's going to be pretty horrendous. A really funny example of this, I climbed Ingleborough recently. Ingleborough is not a tall mountain, 723 meters. And when I climbed Ingleborough, on the way up, the weather was great. It was glorious, spring weather, nice and sunny. When I got to the summit, it was the strongest wind I have ever experienced. But because of the side that I climbed the mountain on, I was sheltered from the wind for most of the way up until the very summit, which is great, of course, because you can't really video wind, can you? You just like hold your phone up and like, oh my God, it's the windiest I've ever experienced it. Maybe you just get some muffled sound. So it's that side of things. It's the fact that when you go out there, it can be very challenging. You have to prepare quite well. And sometimes you don't get the great weather that you were maybe hoping for, and it's pretty tough.
I'm really not seeing the reasons right now that climbing mountains is type 2 fun, or why this would be like a nice activity to do. And the point about it being the strongest wind you've ever experienced just reinforced that. It's like my least favorite type of weather.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. But that's the thing, you're saying, I don't see why it's fun to do, and it's not fun to do. It's fun to have done. You get your little list of all of your Munros or whatever particular to-do list you're working your way through. You complete one, you touch the cairn, or you touch the trig point, and then you tick that one off, and you're like, boom.
What's a trig point?
Trig points are triangulation pillars there, other than it's the thing at the top of the mountain that you touch. It's a mark on the mountain, can be used for measuring distance and things like that. This introduces a thing, though, because you have, obviously, different people have different reasons for climbing mountains, and some people who you could rudely describe as summit baggers literally just want to get to the top, and then that's it. They don't care about anything else. So they might literally climb the mountain or climb the fell or what have you, touch the trig point, and then that's it. They don't care about anything else. That's it. That one's ticked off.
Okay. As opposed to...
There's lots of reasons that people might go out. It isn't necessarily just climbing the summit. It could be to explore their local area. It could be for the fitness. It could be because they like spending time with friends and family, and that's how they do that.
In hopefully the least judgmental way possible, because I don't want this to come off judgmentally. But if I ended up in a family that climbed mountains for fun, I would go into witness protection.
Sorry, you mean type 2 fun?
Oh my God. Pretty sure that's the intro. So you're going to become a fell-top assessor.
It's the best job in the world. I recently found out about the fell-top assessors. There's generally 2, sometimes 3 of them. And what they do is they climb Helvellyn every day on week-on, week-off rotations. So Helvellyn is the 3rd highest mountain in England. And all they do is comment on the weather. So through the winter months, they'll climb Helvellyn and talk about how bad the weather is, from an outdoor activity and hiking point of view. And that's somebody's job. I've climbed Helvellyn twice this year. I should be allowed that job. That's the dream. Become a fell-top assessor. Climb Helvellyn a few times. Boom. Take some photographs. Snow on the top. No snow on the top. That could be a fell-top assessor.
You know the death statistics that you mentioned for people who climb specific mountains?
Yes.
I'm wondering how those would be impacted and what the probability would be if that was your job, how that would change.
It's going to change because this is a difficult thing to say without coming across as very, very rude, but sometimes people die on mountains because of accidents, avalanches, they slip, a rock fall, something like that. And sometimes people die in mountains because they're ill prepared. And if it is your job to do that, I would expect that your individual likelihood of becoming a casualty is lower because of that. Not impossible, accidents still happen, but, if you're climbing Helvellyn every day and the weather is varying throughout the year, you're going to have the equipment that you need, even if it's bad weather in winter.
I suppose your personal risk model is impacted by the fact that you're frequently exposing yourself to that situation. Like how you have a trauma kit for your car and so on.
Yeah, sometimes it is literally preparation in terms of things like fitness, things that you have to do ahead of time over longer periods of time. Sometimes it is things like having the right equipment. There is snow out today, I am taking crampons. And sometimes it is a familiarity with your equipment, right? You could give somebody an ice axe, for example, but if they slip on a mountain, if they don't know how to self-arrest, the fact that they're carrying the ice axe could actually be worse than not carrying it because they could injure themselves on it.
What does self-arrest mean?
In this context of using an ice axe whilst falling down a snow-covered mountain to stop yourself. So if you imagine if you're on a slope and you slip, but the slope is covered in snow, you're going to slide down the mountain, right? You're going to slide. And self-arrest is literally just a pedantically technical term for stopping yourself.
Okay. Have you ever got lost up a mountain?
I guess it depends on what you mean by having gotten lost. I mean, as recently as this weekend, I came off the track. I climbed Scarfell this weekend, but I did it from an interesting route from the south. And the track in that particular area is really, really difficult to see. It's not well trodden. So yeah, I came away from the track. But that's, there's being lost. I think what people imagine is like wandering around in the wilderness for 5 hours on your own. And then there's, I'm off the track and this is inconvenient. I'm 50 meters away from where I should be. No, I've personally never had a serious issue in that regard, a navigational issue where I've gotten lost and not known where I am. The thing with that kind of thing is most of the time it's very difficult to do that. For example, I'm carrying a GPS. The reason that I'm carrying a GPS is to minimize that risk, right? Most of the time, if I get lost, I look down at my GPS, it tells me where I am. You can also configure them to do things like you can tie your GPS into like a smartwatch and things like that and have your smartwatch give you feedback when you come off the track. So if you're more than 10 meters from the track, the smartwatch can tell you. And that can cover you from everything from you lose the track to you just go the wrong way at a fork. So that's the thing about being prepared, right? It's like I carry a GPS because it minimizes the likelihood that I get lost. But it's not a perfect solution. They run on batteries. You can fall over, you can break them. Lord knows I fall over on mountains all the time, about once every time I go out. You've not seen my most recent video, have you? Where I'm walking down a track, literally saying how well managed and how wide and easy this track is, and I fall over.
Personal shortcomings aside.
I think we should call them personal tallcomings, if anything.
Just got a bit too much leg, haven't you?
Got a lot of leg.
Okay, so you don't get lost very often because you carry a GPS. How reliable are those, would you say? Besides the things that you mentioned where it could break or the batteries could die or something like that.
I think one of the interesting things is with equipment. I heard somebody talking about earlier, beginner backpackers, people who have just started going hiking, tend to overestimate how much equipment they need with them and tend to take like way too much food, way too much water, way too much clothing. That's a common problem that new hikers and new backpackers have. Somebody said, it's really easy to deal with that problem. Every time you go out, look at what equipment you didn't use and stop taking that equipment. And I think the problem with that is there's a lot of stuff that I carry that I never use. For example, in the last 5 hikes that I've done, I've used my first aid kit once. I carry it with me every time. It's really unlikely that I'll use it, but I mean, I think the audience is going to work that one out, right? It's like low frequency use, but high importance. So when it comes to the reliability of GPS and stuff like that, they're perfect when they work. I've never had an issue with things like not having enough signal. So GPS needs line of sight to the sky, right? And if you lose line of sight, which can happen in forests, in dense woodland and things like that, then you could have a problem there. I've never had it be such a problem that I haven't been able to deal with that fact. Of course, I'm not relying on the GPS. The GPS is just a cheat code, right? I could walk on a bearing, for example. Or very often, to be honest, if you're in the woods, you're probably on a track. And if you go wrong, if you take the wrong turn at a split or something like that, you're probably not gone wrong very far. And when you emerge from the woodland, you go, oh, I'm on the wrong side or I'm on the wrong track or whatever. So GPS are very reliable, aside from where you might lose line of sight of the sky. The difficulty just comes from the fact that I think problems compound, and your GPS is going to work every time, and then one day you'll fall over. And the day that you fall over, you're injured because you fell, and also you broke your GPS. And now you've got to deal with the fact that you've got an injury and you don't know exactly where you are. I think it's those things that is the problem. And sometimes, like on the preparedness side of things, one of the things that comes up a lot is people think that going out in groups is safer. And I don't really strongly agree with that. So, people say, oh, what if you go out into the backcountry, you go out on a hike and you hurt yourself? Wouldn't it be better if you had friends with you? How much help can those friends give me in that instance? For example, if you fall over and break your GPS and you get lost, great. Now 3 of you are lost. That's not really helped the situation, the fact that there's more people there. I do get the idea in terms of, if you fall, you knock yourself unconscious, something like that, then yes, having somebody there immediately to help you. Like, I do get that it reduces the risk somewhat. I just don't buy this idea that going out in a group is inherently significantly safer than going out on your own. Hi, it's Holly in the edit here. I'm jumping in to say, I think I did a really bad job of making my point just there, and so to avoid confusion and 100 tweets all telling me that I'm wrong, I want to give it another go. And I'll give you some background on what I mean here. So for example, this weekend, whilst I was out on a hike, I stopped to talk to somebody on the trail. I do this quite often, at least to say hello or something like that. Whilst I was talking to them, they said that they thought it was really brave that I was out solo hiking. And I hear this a lot. It's really not uncommon for people to tell me that I'm brave, or they think that it's dangerous to solo hike. So in this episode, I was struggling to make a point about group hikes being safer than solo hikes, and all I really mean is, I don't think that solo hiking is so dangerous that I am brave for doing it. I honestly don't think that solo hiking, if you are well prepared, is that dangerous. I think I'm more at risk walking through the city than I am walking through the backcountry. Sorry for the interruption. Back to your regularly scheduled program.
I think it depends on the situation. It's kind of a silly example, but I was in the cadets when I was a teenager. Ages and ages ago, like well over a decade ago now, I'm talking about this example. And they dropped a group of us out kind of in the middle of nowhere and gave us like a map and a compass, and we had like a torch and like some water and like basic supplies, and said like, make your way back to camp. And it was just like, I'm pretty sure they call that orienteering. Orienteering? Is it orienteering?
It is orienteering, but I like that you pause, because my favorite thing is when people say it wrong and they'll say like orientating and stuff like that.
I've done that before. I've definitely done that before. Anyway, there was a group of us, probably 5 of us, and the person in charge of the compass made a mistake. I don't know what the mistake was, because I was not the person in charge of the compass at the time. And we went several miles in the wrong direction, which meant that we didn't get back when we were supposed to. And that person then tripped in the dark after his torch died and sprained his ankle. And if he had been out on his own, especially as a teenager, I suppose, he would have been extra vulnerable and likely wouldn't have made it back at all, because he didn't have a phone.
What I'm saying there is, the problem is that person was ill prepared. I do think it's interesting that you mention having an issue with the compass. Of course, there is just operator error, a person who does not know how to use a compass. But I think one of the things that it's obvious when you say it, I think a lot of people just don't realize it. North on the map is not where your compass is pointing. In some places that can be out quite significantly, 8 degrees out, for example. And I think that is one of those things that people don't realize, that there's a problem that compounds. And I think a lot of people don't realize that problem exists at all.
So that becomes a very large problem. And compasses, to be honest, if you gave me one now, I'm not confident that I would just know how to use it. I would have to remind myself how they work and look at the scale and all of that and like brush up on it before I would be confident using one.
Another thing as well with the compass is, again, it's obvious when you say it, but people don't realize, they are attracted to magnetic things, not only magnetic north. One of my favorite demonstrations of this was the person had the compass on the table and they moved the compass on the table and it would just change its reading entirely because the table has metal legs. And that would adjust the reading on the compass. And like you said, that adjustment doesn't have to be significant. You can actually cause quite a significant change doing that, but it doesn't have to be significant if you are going over a significant distance.
I'm not sure if this is true, but I think I remember them telling us at the time that the human body has a very slight magnetic field as well, so that you should hold things a little bit further away from your body so that doesn't interfere with the reading. I don't know if that's accurate.
I don't know if that's true, but I do know somewhere that might come up and where I've seen people make that mistake before. Soldiers carrying rifles.
That makes sense.
You might see the effect of, oh, when I hold my compass away from me, it gives me a different reading, but in actuality, that rifle's got a whole bunch of metal in it. So I don't know if that is true, but I have seen people fall foul of that before, especially in poor weather, because you tend to hunch over and pull everything in, and maybe you're just looking down at your compass because it's raining or what have you. But yeah, that is an issue. So you could have someone who, on one hand, just does not know how to read a compass and how to take a bearing, how to march in a bearing, so operator error. You can have somebody who doesn't know things like north on the map is not north on your compass, and then you can also have faulty equipment. I have a faulty compass. It's of course not the compass I take hiking with me, but that is a thing that can happen. Your compass can just not be working. There's some argument there about having two of critical equipment. I don't necessarily know if having two compasses where one of them is broken would help you, because how do you know which one is the working one? But you get the point of equipment can be faulty, even very basic things or seemingly basic things like compasses.
In the event then that your GPS broke somehow, would you have a backup solution, or would you have to go full analog and get a compass and a map out?
So I always carry a map and compass with me, and that would be my fallback, is if my GPS fails for whatever reason, battery, or I don't have line of sight to the sky, then I would use the map and compass. So I always carry that with me. It never comes out of my bag. It's always prepared though. I tend to just carry an ordnance survey map of the area, but it will be on the area that I am operating in. So yeah, that's always prepared. It sounds funny to go full analog and to use a map as if it's a great inconvenience. Generally speaking, it's not, because most of the time, if you're doing a common hike within the Lake District or somewhere like that, you're probably on tracks. Most of the tracks are probably marked. It is just the basic thing. So it could be one small part of this route isn't well marked, and you just need to work out, am I going left or right here? And it can also be for very simple things. So something that happened to me recently, I climbed Scarfell Pike and the weather was very bad at the time. At the summit, I was in the clouds, and the summit of Scarfell Pike, that, like I said, there's this structure on the summit that is circular. It's very big and circular. And all the way up to the summit cairn, it's rocks. There's no track. It's just rocks the whole way up. I'm summit bagging, right? I'm marching to the top, I'm touching that cairn, I'm turning right around, that one's ticked off. Scarfell Pike's it's a really popular mountain, right? It's the biggest one in England, of course it's popular. And so get up to the summit and you have to effectively queue to get to the cairn kind of thing, to touch it and be that one's ticked. And in that space, which was maybe 2-3 minutes, I became disorientated. I don't mean disorientated in terms of I go dizzy and I have to lie down, but I climbed the cairn, touched the summit, took my photograph, that one's ticked off, and then as I set off back down the mountain, set off in the wrong direction. Because think about it, the weather is really close. We're talking about visibility of maybe 20 meters. The summit structure is circular, and you're waiting for a few moments. So anytime that you're distracted, something like that, you can easily lose your cardinal directions. And of course, thankfully, because I'm aware of the situation, I didn't go far wrong. But during that hike, navigation was cairn to cairn, right? So on the way up to the summit, every 20 or so meters, there is another cairn. So that is how navigation was being done. The difficulty is there's 2 or 3 major routes up, and they all have that. So you go, oh, there's the next cairn, and you set off, and I was setting off west and not south. So it's very, very easy for that kind of thing to happen. I think another thing as well with people who are navigating, it's again, some of this stuff, it's so obvious when you say it, but when you are navigating to a point or you're giving somebody directions, the thing that you are using should be permanent and prominent. So it's just turn left at the sheep isn't going to work.
Well, they don't do that where we're from. They use pubs. You know, they'll be like, oh, do you know when you get to the Duke? Yeah, you turn right there and then you follow that road for like a couple of miles and then you get to so-and-so roundabout and then you turn left. Like, that's how they give directions. Don't use sheep.
That is not a bad way of doing it though, right? Because permanent and prominent, you're going to know that you're there and it's very unlikely to move.
Okay, so I feel like some of the things that we're saying, yeah, they're obvious once you say them to people who climb mountains or who go on hikes or who do these things. But
that is the thing. You're absolutely right that they're obvious when you say them, but you could see somebody who's new or inexperienced who wouldn't know those things and is maybe intelligent and educated enough that once you point them out, they go, oh, that's obvious, and would have no problem with it. But it's just maybe something that they wouldn't consider. So a really good example of this is talking to a friend about how I deal with foreseeable circumstances, right? You know, getting injured whilst out and having to contact emergency services or having to contact the MRT. And I asked them, if you get lost, how would you deal with that? And his answer was, he said, just call 999. Like, I'm an idiot. And I'm like, what are you going to say to them? Hello, I'm lost. And I remember telling you about this before, and you mentioned, you know, using a GPS app or using something like What 3 Words that we can get onto in a second. And absolutely, that's the correct approach. But he just hadn't thought it through, and that is the problem, where it's a completely foreseeable risk and they just haven't considered it. For one thing, you get on top of a mountain, is your phone even going to work? Is it going to be out of power, or are you going to have any signal?
I think you had this issue that time you fell in the hole while you're at the mountain, so your phone also wouldn't charge. So even though your battery was out, you'd like taken an emergency charger, you couldn't use it at all. So now you carry a backup phone.
I carry a couple of devices with me. I had the second device with me. It was just for emergency use only, and I knew that it was going to be okay. We should talk about that idea of like, I know this is going to be okay in a second, because I do think that's an important thing to keep in mind. But yeah, I fell on a mountain and I fell into water. And what happened was my phone got wet, so I could no longer charge it. So depends how good your habits are. Are you walking up a mountain, you know, you're summit bagging, your attention is on the cairn, your attention's on the trig point, you're thinking of nothing else? Or are you out for a summer walk and you're listening to a podcast and you're burning that battery down, thinking that, well, it's okay because I've got a battery charger in my bag, and then the device gets wet and it will no longer charge? If people haven't come across this before, I use an iPhone just by chance. I'm sure other devices are similar. If my phone gets wet, it detects moisture in the charging port. It will disable charging to not damage the device. You can override that. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of like, do you know if this is going to be all right? You can plug a charger in and tell the device, no, still try and charge if it is an actual emergency situation. So that's something that it could have done. Of course, you can charge wirelessly and things like that. It's inefficient, but if the charging port is obstructed for some reason or broken, yeah, there's options there. But yeah, that was what the situation was. Phone was functioning perfectly, screen was functioning perfectly. It had some battery in it. It was somewhat low. It just got wet and it wouldn't charge. You might be sitting there thinking, oh, I've got 30% battery. That's low, but not a problem. But how far are you from signal? You know, if you're 4 hours out on a hike and you're burning your battery pretty quickly, for example, it's cold, your battery will decrease faster when it's cold. That's when those things can be a problem.
Doesn't your battery die quicker as well when you can't get signal? Like, they advise you put it into airplane mode if you're in a signal dead zone.
That's a great point. I'm sure those kinds of specifics will differ based on device. But yeah, it's my understanding that when your phone can communicate with a tower, it will adjust its radio power level so that it can talk to that tower and it doesn't need to overshoot the tower. So if you're very close to a source of signal, very close to a tower, your phone will transmit less powerfully and therefore use less power. So if it can't see any towers, that radio is going to be set to high. It's going to be pushing out a lot of signal trying to make that connection for you. So yeah, if you put your phone into airplane mode, it does conserve power, and that is why. And I do find that to be the case. When I go out and I know I'm not going to get signal, I put my phone in airplane mode because it quite significantly adjusts the battery. It's not just the fact that the radio is turned off, it's the fact that when it has no signal, it's using more power than necessary.
Maybe an example then with a first time or a novice climber, potentially they're climbing a new mountain that they haven't tackled before, and they get somewhere near the summit don't have any signal. Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever it is that they're using suddenly isn't working because they don't have any signal. What happens?
So one of the things is, like, if you're looking at getting into this kind of thing, or you're looking, it doesn't necessarily have to be hiking or mountain climbing or anything like that. It could be any activity where you're at increased risk. You could, be doing any kind of activity like that. You could be going kayaking or something. And each of these activities has different risks, but it's the kind of thing that you can think through. So whenever I hear a new hiker or a person who's going to try something significant, so they're not, going to the local fell, but maybe traveling somewhere, I try and think through, like, the mistakes that a new hiker could make. One of them, surprisingly common, is going to your local outdoors store, buying all of the equipment, and then going out on the hike with that equipment. And there's so many ways that can go wrong. Those boots aren't broken in. That's the first thing. You don't necessarily know how well those boots even fit you. You might have tried them on in the store, but that's not necessarily going to give you a good indicator of how much those boots are going to be a problem for you, especially if they're specialist boots, like, B3 or B2 boots. You're going to have different problems with those. If you're doing something like wild camping, are you going out with a tent that you've never put up before? Are you going out with a tent that you don't know if it's complete? You might get up onto the fell and realize that you're missing a pole or something. So there's those kinds of problems. But I think the major things that people would be thinking of, certainly on the technology side of things, would be, I think a lot of people just don't think about the idea of not having mobile phone signal. We're just so used to it in towns, cities. Even if you're in a smaller village out of the way a little bit, you might have intermittent signal. You might not have great signal, but the idea of just not having signal for the entire duration that you're out, having 12 hours with no signal, I think is just something that a lot of people don't realize how significant that can be. And it, of course, it just escalates, right? So are you going to climb Helvellyn in a Lake District? You might not have signal for some of the day, but you'll probably have some at some point. Or are you going up to Scotland and climbing a Munro or something like that? Maybe have less signal. Are you going to the Rough Bounds in the northwest of Scotland? You might go all day without any signal. And I think it's just that thing that you very easily could come up with an alternative solution if you thought of that problem. Put the tent up in your garden. Oh, yep, checked. I know how it goes up. I've got everything I need for it. Easy. It's just whether people prepare in that way or not. But yeah, if you're climbing something local to you, if you're going up Helvellyn or if you're going up Ingleborough or something like that, check that you have got everything with you that you need and that everything works and that your boots fit you.
Oh yeah, I think a common one is, like, people buy, like, hiking boots for something that'll give them ankle support, and then, like, they try them on with normal socks or, like, ankle socks or something really thin, not walking socks that are nice and thick and will probably add a half size to your shoe size. And then you get blisters and you have to stop halfway through.
There's also, when I talk about the boot fit, you might try a boot on that's quite tight to your feet that feels okay when you're on level ground. But when you're descending a mountain and your feet are sitting further forwards in those boots, they might push on the toe cap, and that can be quite painful. You might get problems with your toes. Taking it again to a more extreme, though, I recently read Into Thin Air, which is a book about Everest. And something that stood out to me was one of the climbers in the Into Thin Air book had new boots, and he had not tried his crampons on with those boots, and they didn't fit. So, you buy your boots, you try them on, you wear them in, they feel great, but if you don't actually put your crampons on them, maybe you'll get there, you realize that they don't fit very well. Either they're the wrong kind of boots, you've got C2 crampons and B1 boots or something like that, or they're just not compatible because different manufacturers. And that's hilarious because climbing Everest and having crampons that don't fit your boots is just like,
I will bear that in mind if I ever have to buy crampons.
So, like, as a non-hiker, as somebody who purely engages in type 1 fun and doesn't think that climbing mountains is a good idea, you can foresee some problems, right? So you can foresee going out and getting injured and being maybe just a little bit off the track, nobody's passing you, anything like that. I hiked this weekend. I went 4 hours on that hike before I passed somebody on the track. It happens. And that I wasn't particularly, out in the wilderness. That was just the Lake District, but it happens. So you get injured, your mobile phone doesn't have any signal. How would you think to deal with that? So ahead of time, if you're worrying about the problem of not having any signal, you're not on a mountain and your phone's dead, but, like, how would you think to deal with that?
I would brush up on how to use a compass and make sure I had a map with me. I'm not sure that I would take, so because I'm not a climber, I'm not even like a hobbyist mountaineer or anything like that, I probably wouldn't have like backup tech to bridge that gap between like my phone not having signal. But I think it depends what you need it for. Like if you need to ring emergency services because you're up a mountain and you're injured, or somebody needs first aid, or you're lost or something, and you do it regularly, then it might make sense to have something like a satellite phone.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The point of like, if you don't do it regularly, or if you're just like an occasional hiker, is fair enough, because some of this equipment is super expensive. It might even be the fact that you're a really keen climber. You might go out every week, but some of the equipment is really expensive. So I could say, well, the solution is obvious. It's a sat phone, but they're expensive. So I would acknowledge somebody saying that that's just outside of their means. They want to enjoy the hobby. They don't have the disposable income. That's fair enough. But yeah, there's other ways that you can deal with it. So if you're worried about your phone being low on battery, take a battery pack with you. So you mentioned things like having a map and compass with you. It's just like in the middle of the day, it might be nice and sunny, but as it moves into the evening, it might get colder. So making sure that you can deal with that. One of the big things with being injured on a mountain is not necessarily the injury, especially when it's something really common like turning an ankle or something. Like it happens all the time on hikes. It might be the fact that actually you can call emergency services and they say, great, we're sending someone out, they'll be with you in the next 2 hours. And then you're sitting on a mountainside in the rain for 2 hours and you end up with a twisted ankle and hypothermia. But those things are, again, really easy to deal with. It's like, do you have warm kit? Do you have wet kit?
Mm-hmm. So that's where you'd wear, I guess, a sweat wicking base layer, thermals or something that don't what, that don't hold moisture.
I don't think we need to get into a long discussion on terms of like the layering systems that you should use. You are absolutely right, though. I think you could just summarize that as cotton kills. If you're wearing materials that are going to hold sweat, you're going to get cold. If you're wearing cotton. Oh man, I climbed Helvellyn via Striding Edge a couple of weeks ago, like one of my favorite hikes. And I looked over the statistics and it's like something like one person a year dies on Striding Edge. It's quite a difficult route, it can be. This guy out there is like wearing a t-shirt and jeans with like kicks, just regular trainers. And that's fine, because in the weather that we've had recently, you absolutely can climb Helvellyn dressed like that. But the thing that made me laugh was, it seemed to be that was the only equipment that he had with him. He had jeans and a t-shirt, and it's like, you could get like a light rain shower and you're suddenly going to like be in a problem scenario and getting dragged off a mountain because you're completely ill prepared for that situation. But yeah, certain materials, cotton, for example, it's bad material to wear up a mountain because when it gets wet, that doesn't have to be rain. It could just be your own sweat. It's going to hold onto that, and that could lead to you getting cold if you ever stop moving.
Yeah, but then you can also carry things like little pack-a-macs, right? Those little plastic, like, hoodie things. You know, the ones that fold away really small. They'll fit in, like, a little backpack or in your pocket or something. And if it looks like it's going to rain, then that's, like, a really good thing to have hold of. You don't necessarily need to go in, like, a big, fluffy, down parka outdoor jacket. It could be summery and then suddenly rain.
You're absolutely right. The equipment that you need is going to vary based on the environment that you're in. And of course, it's going to vary based on the weather. And if rain is unlikely, but maybe you'll have a shower, then just a light rain jacket would be fine for that. And you are right, you can get like really lightweight stuff. You can get some emergency stuff as well, which is just like, an emergency blanket. It's going to weigh like 500 grams, something like that. You can leave it in your backpack, never touch it. It's not going to cost you very much. Grab it from like any outdoor store. And then if you do get caught out, if suddenly it's colder than you expected, or it's rains, or you get injured or something like that, yeah, that stuff's really easy. And I'm not saying that people need to take snowshoes, crampons, an ice axe, an emergency blanket, and 2 satellite locator beacons with them just to climb Garfell or something like that. It absolutely does escalate with the frequency that you go out, also just where you are going. If you're going somewhere more extreme, then you should probably have more equipment. I just think it's a really bad idea to climb a mountain wearing a t-shirt. Can I tell you something funny, though? I've been reading about routes up Mont Blanc. So Mont Blanc is the highest mountain in Western Europe, right?
You say that again.
Mont Blanc.
As a French person, you say it again.
Absolutely not.
Sorry.
That's a problem, actually. If you speak more than one language and you need to say a word that is from another language, especially if they're quite far apart, like if you speak English and Japanese and you need to say a Japanese word, but you are speaking English, should you say that word like... It's because it's one of those, it's like, you got to either be incorrect or an asshole. That's the only options here. I think that's something that comes up surprisingly often. So yeah, if I'm speaking English, I'm going to pronounce it the English way. But it's looking at climbing Mont Blanc, and one of the funny things about that, this person was describing how fantastic a goal it is, right? It's the highest mountain in Western Europe, it's the highest mountain in France. It's a challenging route, often has a lot of snow up there. There's going to be some technical aspects to it, dealing with ropes and things like that. Not to a significant degree, but certainly more than you would get within the UK. And he explained that when you're just about to get to the summit and you're just about to crest the top and you're feeling amazing, that type 2 fun's kicking in and you've had a horrendous time, but it feels great. You're going to walk up to the summit and somebody's going to walk past you wearing jeans and a t-shirt because there's a ski lift.
Oh, that feels like cheating.
So he basically said, like, enjoy the climb, and if you get to the top, just get back down again. That's just like, don't spend any time at the summit because you'll be really frustrated that there's a lift up to the top. Because you walk past people in shorts and stuff, and you've just spent 6 hours doing an ascent.
Does the fact that other people are taking a type 1 fun approach really like detriment the fact that it's type 2 fun for you though? Does it make it type 3 fun if someone else is doing type 1 activities in the same place?
There's a lot of thoughts here, and it definitely depends on people. A lot of mountaineers will say it's not the elevation, it's the technical difficulty. So there's a lot of mountaineers out there who are not interested in Everest, they're interested in K2, or they're interested in Kanchenjunga because they're harder climbs. They're not interested in Everest because it's the tallest, for example. So there are some people out there who will hold those lines on it. There's some people out there who will hold a line on climbing the proper way. So summiting Everest is not as good as summiting Everest without assistance of oxygen, or a solo ascent, or a north face ascent, or something like that. So there are people out there that say getting dragged to the top of a mountain by a guide is not the same as a solo oxygenless ascent. And I can see what those people are saying. Generally speaking, though, no, if I climb Mont Blanc and somebody's gone up there in the lift, that is not going to bother me. At the time, it might. Don't look at my face. If I, like, you know, I'm sweating, I drop my bag, I've just worked hard for 6 hours and somebody walks past me wearing trainers and shorts, that's probably going to frustrate me at the time. But that doesn't, the fact that that is possible, the fact that that mountain has a lift doesn't mean that I'm going to change my approach to that. And in the same way that I'm never going to do a solo ascent of Everest, it's never going to happen, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to enjoy myself climbing mountains. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to hit 5,000 meters or 6,000 meters or something like that. You can enjoy the journey without necessarily having to just aim for the biggest or the best or the technically hardest. Just go out and have fun. Have some type 2 fun.
You sound like a LinkedIn influencer.
I'll get a job as a mountain guide and then...
A mountain guide? Like a Sherpa? Are they called Sherpas? Am I referencing the right thing?
A Sherpa is a specific kind of person. The thing that you are thinking of is a Sherpa, yeah. So a Sherpa is a... There's a lot of nuance here that I'm like trying to avoid. So what you are thinking of is the people who will assist you up a mountain like Everest, right? So if you're climbing Everest and you want somebody to help carry equipment and somebody to help with the track and things like that, those people are very likely to be Sherpa. Sherpa in common parlance is used for like a high altitude mountain assistant for mountains such as Everest, but it's actually the Sherpa are a people. It is okay. So I don't want to insult somebody just by saying, oh, it's a high altitude porter. I think that would be derogatory unnecessarily.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. I'll have to have a Google and educate myself.
One of the reasons that they're so good with things like ascents of Everest is that they live at high altitude.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess they would be less prone to like altitude sickness and things like that.
Yeah, so less prone to it and also just more experienced with it, you know, because they're likely to have grown up at altitude. Not necessarily the altitudes of Everest, but it's the difference can count for a lot as well when it comes to altitude.
Do you have a favorite kind of assistive mountaineering technology? So it doesn't have to necessarily assist you in climbing the mountain, but it could be like life-saving technology or comms or something like that. Just anything in mountaineering.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. Like, I'm a big advocate for the use of radios, and I'm a big advocate for the use of satellite communicators and SLBs. So I guess we should just talk about all of those things and also why some of them have got bad names. Again, it's going to come down to what are you doing? If you are going as a team, having radios with you so that you can communicate between the party if the party aren't all together is a really useful thing. Those kinds of things are often just overlooked. Also, things like satellite communicators. So we've talked a couple of times about how your mobile phone's probably not going to work. There's loads of situations where you're out in the backcountry, or maybe even not that far into the backcountry, just like the Lake District, and your phone's not going to work, and satellite communicators exist. So we mentioned GPS for navigation reasons. GPS is going to tell you where you are, but satellite communicators are cost-effective. They are still expensive, but in comparison to something like a sat phone or other satellite devices, they're relatively cheap. And it's going to allow you two things. It's going to allow you to send text messages. So you can send messages back home, tell your friends and family that you're okay. You can do check-ins, that kind of thing. If you're not maybe doing a day hike, but you're out for a few days, you're doing a trek, or maybe just a wild camp, you're out for 48 hours, something like that. It's a good way of telling people back home that you're safe. You can hook those up so that they can track your position as well. So maybe every 30 minutes, it'll tell somebody where you're up to. So if they know the route that you're taking, and you're doing 30-minute check-ins, and then something goes wrong and you disappear off that, they know where you were going, the timings that you're expected at, and where you last were. And also, satellite communication devices have an SOS button on them. So if something goes wrong, if you are the person who's out there and says, I'll just call 999, you're not getting on the phone to emergency services and saying, I don't know where I am. You press that SOS button and they know where you are because it sends your location to them. And there's different providers of these devices, but typically speaking, if you press that SOS button and the emergency response center does not hear a further communication from you, they will dispatch a rescue team to you. So if all you do is hit the SOS button, they don't hear any more from you, there's someone coming out to help. So yeah, if you get yourself in a bad way, satellite communicator can really help out.
Sounds like an expensive pocket dial though.
The SOS button is covered, typically. So if you've got it in your pocket or something like that, it's unlikely that you're going to, on a well-maintained device, hit that button. The battery in those things lasts days and days and days. They can be really low power depending on how you're using them, how they're configured, and which device you've got, but they can last weeks. Another thing is, again, it requires line of sight to the sky. So if you've got something tiny like a Garmin InReach Mini or something like that, and you've got it stuffed at the bottom of your rucksack thinking it's sending messages back to your family telling them that you're all okay and giving them updates on your progress along the track, it's probably not if it's at the bottom of your rucksack. It needs to see the sky. Yeah, I think they're great pieces of kit. They are expensive. To buy the device, you're talking hundreds, and you're going to need a subscription to send messages. That can be tens of pounds a month. And also, depending on the jurisdiction that you're in, you might need a rescue membership as well. It doesn't need to, people don't think that you've got to get to the top of the summit and stand on your tippy toes and hold the device up. I'm not talking about that, just talking about that. These devices may not work well with, significant tree cover and stuff like that.
What are rescue memberships?
When bad things happen, there's a couple of ways of dealing with that, right? And this could be, you're on a mountain, you call 999. And even if you don't know exactly where you are, you could explain to the operator where you set off from, what your intended route was, what your intended destination was, the last place that you knew that you were, how far you think you traveled. And you can give them a lot of information that could help them, especially with relatively easy summits like, I set off from Patterdale, my intention was to climb Helvellyn. They're going to know roughly where you are and they're going to be able to come and help you. So when I say, just call 999, like that's going to help. Don't buy too much into that. You can talk them through. Or it might be a situation where you need a mountain rescue team to come out. And that could be that you phone emergency services or you hit the SOS button on your device, on your emergency device. And what happens next depends a lot based on where in the world you are. And this is the problem that you get when you talk about like a global rescue, right? So you're going to have a real different experience if you are 2/3 of the way up Scarfell Pike, or if you are up a mountain in France, or if you are to the Himalayas. It's all going to differ. But there are teams out there that will come and help you. In the UK, most of the mountain rescue teams are volunteers or charities. And elsewhere in the world, you can get a membership. So there's companies that are dedicated to doing those kinds of rescues. And I guess I say those kinds of rescues as if just pulling somebody off a mountain is always the same. Because again, it's going to differ depending on Are you up an alpine mountain, or are you in a hostile environment? The level of rescue that you require is going to differ there. But yeah, there's companies out there that you can get a membership with that you can press that button on that device and they will dispatch a rescue team to come and help you out, to come and drag you off a mountain.
Not to be flippant, but why can't they just like send a helicopter out?
They often will. That is often how they would deal with that. I watched a video this weekend of somebody who got cut off by the sea, and they were effectively clinging to a cliffside in England. And this is the thing with how it can go from zero to really messed up really quickly. They're walking along the beach and then they get cut off, and then suddenly a Coast Guard helicopter's pulling them off the cliff. And it's fantastic, the fact that, you know, a lot of these people do this as a voluntary service. It is flippant to say, like, well, why don't they just send a helicopter? But very often that's exactly what they're going to do. The difficulty with that is, and again, it depends with extremes. So if you're like in the Lake District or something like that, the weather could call off a helicopter. The ground could as well. You might just be in a really difficult place to get a helicopter to you. So they might send a ground-based MRT to help you get to somewhere the helicopter can get to, or to take you all the way down. When you're at extreme altitudes like Everest, aircraft can't always get that high. Now, people will think of like, but passenger jets fly at 50,000 feet. They ain't landing a passenger jet on Everest, are they? They're sending something smaller, helicopters and smaller planes. And yeah, those have operational ceilings at a maximum altitude that they can operate at. But yeah, like storms, wind, snow, low visibility, that's all going to mess with the idea of just sending a helicopter out. But yeah, truth is, in most instances, that's probably going to solve the problem, isn't it?
I think we should explain what RECO is, because I don't think we did that.
RECO, yeah.
And I think that's a good way to finish the episode.
I mentioned briefly that there is ways that SAR and MRT, so search and rescue teams and mountain rescue teams, can find you if you don't know where you are. And I mentioned the most basic example would be talking to emergency services on the phone and telling them where you started your journey, where you're intending on going, where you remember last being. So at what point did you become lost? How long you've been traveling for, those kinds of things. Like that information, they can piece it together to work out where you are likely to be and then do a search in that area. In the same way that Coast Guards can take into account things like the currents. They have mechanisms for tracking where a person is likely to be based on the current currents. And they also take into account things like, is it a person in the water or a small boat, and things like that. And that adjusts the measurements that they take and how they do it, those kinds of things. And there's simple things you can do from a preparation point of view. For example, if you are parking your car and then going on a hike, one of the things that you could do is leave your route in your vehicle, because the search and rescue team is likely to come across your vehicle, and if your route is available, a sensible thing. It's not something I've done previously, but that was recommended to me recently, and I thought that sounds like a good idea, having your route printed out, and then they'll be able to see that. I mentioned RECO specifically, and what this is a passive system that you'll often see either built into rucksacks or built into clothing and things like that. And the presence of RECO can be detected with a RECO detector. So this came about, it's my understanding, from things like alpine and ski risks, avalanche risks, those kinds of things. And the idea is that the search and rescue team, either in their helicopter or on their ground teams, can carry RECO detectors that are directional finders for that material. So you don't need to worry about having batteries in a transponder, something like that. It is literally in your clothes or in your backpack, or ideally both. And the idea being that if they know roughly where they're thinking, they can pass over with helicopters and they can send the SAR teams into that area, and they'll be able to find you based on effectively material fitted into your clothing.
It's really cool. Very cool.
Is there anything we've missed?
What 3 words? Because you were being antagonistic.
Yeah, actually, let's quickly wedge what 3 words in the top 10. Yeah, I have quite a traditional approach to the problem of getting lost. And for me, I would say that people who are going out on serious hikes, you're doing units of miles, you should take a map with you. You should learn how to read that map, and you should learn how to give a grid reference so that if you have to call emergency services, you can tell emergency services where you are. That is a low-cost method of dealing with that problem. Yeah, it's going to be better if you have GPS. Yeah, it's going to be better if you have an SLB. A lot of people might think of alternative solutions. So one real common one is What 3 Words. This is an application that will tell you your location, and it does that by giving you 3 words. These are just 3 common English words that are a representation of your location on the planet. I think this is a good idea. I've seen many MRT complain that there are some problems with the approach. So one thing could be accents, mispronunciations, and things like the message being passed. So you might say the 3 words to the person on the other end of the phone at emergency services, and when they pass that on to the next person, it can get lost in that. There might be 4 or 5 people between you and the actual responder on the ground trying to find you. And some of these problems are things like people not recognizing words and mispronouncing them, or it could just be plurals. I actually prepared a good example of this where you have to be careful how you say it, otherwise it might get misconstrued. So what 3 words beside allies spirit? Those 3 words are Bowfell in the Lake District, so one of the mountains in the Lake District. But beside ally spirit is in Kingston upon Hull, which is the other side of the country. That subtle difference there is a plural next to a word that begins with an S. So beside allies spirit or beside allies spirit, you could imagine those 2 words getting squashed. So allies and ally, where the next word begins with an S getting squashed. Don't get me wrong, I'm not thinking that you'll call emergency services and say, I was trying to climb Bowfell, I'm in the Lake District, this is my what 3 words, and then suddenly they're going to go, this guy's in Hull, and send the MRT off to Hull. All I'm saying is that in those instances, you are providing your location using what 3 words, and if when they put it into their app, it is not the correct location, they don't know where you are. That information hasn't helped them. And there's the potential through plurals and misspelled words and things like that for that to happen a lot. Boasted instead of boosted, procures instead of procured. It can happen surprisingly easily. Sometimes when you get a word wrong, you put in the wrong 3 words and you're going to get somewhere in America or somewhere in Karachi or something like that. And obviously those are going to be spotted to be incorrect. But some of them could confuse them and lead to delays.
I have a question, and it's going to sound silly because I'm not a mountaineer, but why couldn't we build this app using like coordinates instead? Like longitude, is it longitude or longitude? Latitude. I don't know what the word is, but I know what I mean. Okay, why couldn't we build that app using those?
That already exists. So there is apps that will give you a grid reference, and there is apps that will give you your GPS coordinates. Your GPS coordinates is going to be numbers, right? And I would say the likelihood of stating a number over the phone and somebody making a mistake with that, especially if you're careful with your pronunciation, is going to be less than somebody misstating a word or getting confused over a plural or something like that. I would say that is likely the case. But yeah, there's apps that will give you a grid reference. There's apps that will give you your GPS coordinates. There's apps that will give you those do already exist. I can see what the intention was with what 3 words, and it's this balance of effectiveness and simplicity, isn't it? Just saying 3 words in principle seems like a simple thing to do, and it isn't any 3 words, right? You're not going to get like medical terms and astrological terms and things like that within what 3 words. It is a reduced dictionary. So I do think they could do more, and no doubt they are looking to improve that so that there is less potential for failure within that model. That is effectively one of the things that I do think is what's wrong with a grid reference. I get it. The counterpoint could be not everybody knows how to take a grid reference, and learn how to read a map, and also just use an app that gives you one. Then it's no, there's no difference. What do you think about it? What's your opinion?
It seems like positive intent and like it could provide some value. I think like anything in its infancy or in very early stages, there's probably some issues with execution that need to be worked out. But I think fundamentally, I see what they were going for. I'm just not sure why we couldn't use coordinates or something instead. But I suppose it makes it more attractive to lay people. It's more user-friendly.
Yeah, I think the simplicity angle is something that is a big benefit of that. And of course, I would defer to the experts. I would defer to what do the MRT teams think about this, and if they were saying, it's great and we're all using it, then that's fair enough. They're on the ground, they're doing that work. I have seen MRT complain about it though. And I have seen them give statistics around how frequently it actually just didn't help them. But I guess that would be the same as people who go out hiking and don't take a map with them. I could sit here and say just take a grid reference, but if you don't know how to read a map or you don't have a map with you, then yeah, I would concede that point.
I think there are some issues with these kinds of apps where there are problems that you can't predict and don't necessarily foresee, and they don't come to light until you have a massive user base testing it in live for you. Yeah.
Everything's harder with scale, and things like accents and all of those kinds of things are definitely going to get worse the more people who are using it, and in the more locations that it's being using. Yeah, I get it. I think the idea of it just being simple is definitely a draw point for it. I just think there's some issues. Like I say, I put some in the show notes around, in particular, plurals or words that could easily be misinterpreted, boosted versus boasted.
Yeah, I think that's a big one in terms of accent, actually. And it's something that, like, if you're northern and you move to the south, it can be really uncomfortable. I was in a French class when I was at uni, and my tutor was asking each of us how you would get around an island, and you'd have to say it in English and then translate it to French. And some people said, like, in a car, on foot, by a train, something like that. And I said, on a boat. And she was like, a boat? A boat? What's a boat? And I was like, a boat. And she was like, oh, a boat! I've never been so mortified in my life. I was the only person there who wasn't from, like, south of Birmingham, I want to say. So the Yorkshire accent sticks out quite a lot. And I think, like, saying, like, boasted versus boasted is like, well, the other example you've got here is procures versus procured. If you're on a bad line or you lose the end of the word, like, that's it.
And if anyone happens to be a member of an MRT and you think it's great, please let us know.
Yeah. And maybe, like, learn your phonetic alphabet just in case.
This is the thing. I thought about that. And if we're going to break down to phonetically saying over the phone what the words are, just say the numbers of the grid reference or of the coordinates. That's the thing that I struggle with.
Yeah. Assuming that you've got one, though. Like, if all you've got is what 3 words, or you haven't got an app on your phone that could give you that, and you've suddenly really poor signal, or you've got signal but no internet, for example, so you're having to rely on that, then I guess spelling out the word is still a good alternative, if a bit inconvenient and lengthy.
If you have the foresight to install what 3 words, just install an app that will give you your grid reference and your coordinates. I don't see that. Also, so many people don't know the phonetic alphabet. You know,
it's like
so many people.
26 words.
Yeah, but it's just like you get people saying, yeah, pterodactyl, gnome, knight.
Yeah, knight is a horrible one, because do you mean like the knight in shining armor or nighttime? I spent like a brief period of time in a call center and I was on a grad scheme, so I had to learn my phonetic alphabet because sometimes you're speaking to people with hearing problems or who are a bit elderly or something, or who just need to spell out their postcode because the line's bad. You kind of got to try and work with what you've got in the situation and make these things accessible for as many people as possible. And I think what 3 words, even if it's flawed execution, has raised awareness, which is good.
I would concede that point, that how long would it take me to teach you how to take a grid reference of your current location versus how long would it take me to teach you how to use what 3 words? I would concede that point.
Maybe you could build an app that makes grid references easier.
Did they exist?
Yeah.
That is the thing. Yeah, you can download
Okay.
that.
Well, maybe if they get better at marketing, then they'll solve this problem for us.
I have an app that just lets me really easily text somebody my coordinates. Not thinking from a emergency situation point of view, but just like how with satellite communicators and satellite locators, they can give somebody an update of how far through your route you are. So somebody, a family member or something like that, knows where you're going and how long you're likely to be. You can just give them an update on how far around you are. You can do that with a satellite communicator, or I do it with my phone most of the time. If I've got signal, I can just effectively click to send a message that says, I'm okay, and this is where I am. And the person who receives the text message doesn't need an app or anything to see that. It'll just pop up. This particular one uses Google Maps, so they get a link, they press the link, it shows them on Google Maps where I am.
You can get Apple Watches that have things like fall detection built in, which are really, really useful for if you have like elderly or disabled or vulnerable family members or children, things like that. And they can also auto alert emergency services to send somebody out if they detect that the wearer has had a fall. And also, if you power off an iPhone now, it tells you that they're still discoverable using Find My iPhone. I'm wondering if that would work if you didn't have any signal. And like if that would be a viable alternative if you're wearing an Apple Watch or something, if potentially that could alert emergency services if you had a fall when you were up a mountain, or if your battery died, if it could still like find that device and therefore the person carrying it.
The signal thing depends. So, for example, on a mobile phone, if you don't have network coverage, 999 will still work if there is another network that you have signal for. So emergency calls will go through on another network. So it just depends. I could foresee that working where you don't have signal, but there is network coverage for another network. Travel insurance is such a great one as well, because it's like, get travel insurance that's appropriate for where you're going and what you're doing. It's going to be a difference between travel insurance for sitting in a resort and travel insurance for climbing a mountain. Insurance very often has fair, sensible limitations. I've seen travel insurance policies that have a maximum elevation. This is a insurance company where they offer mountaineering or alpine insurance as a separate product. You get a lower premium if you're not doing those things. And yeah, one insurance policy I was looking at recently, for example, had a maximum elevation of 5,000 meters.
I suppose you need different travel insurance depending on the sort of holiday you're going on, because a lot of them don't cover things like extreme sports or water sports. So if you want to go scuba diving, or if you want to go white water rafting or jet skis, that's another one. Or if you're on like a powerboat or something instead, that's going to be more risky and more expensive.
I think that's a great example as well, because I think if you're going to climb above 5,000 meters, most people would think, okay, I probably need mountaineering insurance. I think that's a sensible leap to make. But your travel insurance might have a clause that excludes extreme sports, as they put it, but that might mean things like jet skis. And you might look at that and go, well, I'm not doing extreme sports, but actually you might be, because, there's the common use of the word and then the specific within the policy.
I just feel like you could have type 2 fun in a safer environment that doesn't require specialist rescue squads if something goes wrong.